Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome everybody to my fourth Tuesday Revolutionize Your Retirement Interview with Experts series. I'm Dorian Mintzer, owner and president of Revolutionize Retirement, and your host for the series. So, without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Tom Kottke, who's a cardiologist and health services researcher in the Twin Cities area of Minneapolis and St. Paul. After 17 years practicing at Mayo Clinic Rochester, he moved to Health Partners, where he's now medical director for well-being, while continuing to practice cardiology. Currently, his research and program development focuses on how individuals can increase their healthy life expectancy and increase their sense of well-being. And the topic today is basically that, positive health and well-being for you and your patients or clients. And as I have talked with Tom and also read some of the material that you're going to have, what I love so much is that his material is so applicable at any life stage, but it's particularly important as we age. And he really integrates, as you'll see, positive psychology and healthy and positive aging. And they're going to be some of the concepts that many of you have heard before, flourishing, and really evidence-based ways to take care of yourself. Before I start asking questions of Tom and turn it over to him, I just also want to acknowledge and thank Ann Neal, who's a executive coach in New York, who actually introduced me to Tom, and I know she's on the call, and I just wanted to acknowledge that this is how I often meet new people. So as some of you may be aware of other experts, let me know if you think that they would be really interesting people to bring to professionals and the public. So without further ado, Tom, welcome. And I always like to start with, if you wouldn't mind just sharing, what got you interested in all of this?
Thanks, Dory. I would say there were three things. One was I was seeing a lot of patients who didn't really meet the criterion of depression, but they didn't have any goals and they weren't feeling well. They were just, if in the Roman Catholic Church, if you considered hell as depression and heaven as really well-being, they were in purgatory. I mean, they were just going through the day, waiting to get up, start, wait for it to finish. And so that was one trigger. The second trigger was I chaired a work group over at the Institute for Clinical Systems Improvement. We started out with the topic of preventing chronic disease. And a lot of the work group said, we've got to consider depression, or we've got to name depression as a lifestyle. Sorry, depression's not a lifestyle. It's a state of being. It's not like physical activity. It's not like smoking or drinking too much or poor nutrition or good on the flip side of those. And so we started looking for evidence that there were practices, behaviors that affected well-being. And we did recognize that depression is a major barrier to getting people to invest in healthy lifestyles. Because if you don't care about life, you're not going to care about investing. And so that was a second course. And then finally, Dr. George Isham, who is a member of the Institute of Medicine, the National Academy of Medicine, asked me to work on a single metric of health and well-being that could be applied nationally. And thinking this through over the last 5 or 6 years, I've concluded that we really can't. There's, on the one hand, there's health, which is what we as healthcare organizations might measure in people. And then there's well-being, which is what they report to us. And then health has to be divided into present health and sustainability of health. And you take an example of take a young man who's fit as a fiddle, no risks, perfect blood pressure, perfect parameters, gets drunk, gets on a motorcycle. Sustainability of health is low in both current health and sustainability. Anyway, that's how I got involved.
Really interesting, and this led you to, as you say, developing these metrics, and also part of what I really like is the fact that so much of what you're doing it's based, and it's those SMART goals that I think we'll be talking about as we go forward. But make it a kind of interesting, you talk about increasing healthy life expectancy rather than just this longevity thing. And so how does a person increase healthy life expectancy?
I think we can go right to the graphics and answer that question. So what whizzed by there was disclosures that I have no financial conflicts of interest with any of this, and I won't be advocating any commercial products or off-label use of medications. But what increasing healthy lifestyle really focuses, there's 6 major activities: adequate physical activity, not using any tobacco products or being exposed to them, and not using, I think what's particularly important too, is not using flavored vaporizing flavors. I'm not going to go into that, but it's really nasty. And then fruits and vegetables keep coming out in the analyses as enough fruits and vegetables. And so it's as close to a vegetarian diet as you can eat help you stay healthy. Alcohol only in moderation, drink or 2 a day. Healthy sleep, which seems to be a huge problem for Americans, particularly now with mobile devices and screens. The quality of the light that comes off of our mobile devices keeps us awake. And then finally, healthy thinking. And this is not just optimism. It's not optimism. It's gratitude, kindness, and thankfulness. Next graphic, Donna.
And Tom, I want to tell you that I think you clicked on the webcast version, so it's going to be a little bit of a lag before you see the graphic.
Okay, I will. So, it is slow, isn't it? Did I? So, we have a big focus on depression, and we traditionally ask, there's something called the PHQ-9, which is screening for depression, but we ask, for example, do you have little interest in doing things, trouble falling asleep, poor appetite, trouble concentrating, thoughts that you would be better off dead, and are you feeling down, depressed, feeling tired, feeling bad about yourself, or moving or speaking so slowly? But we don't ask, are you enjoying life? Are you having fun? Do you look forward to things? That's really, I think, where we ought to be. Next graphic, Donna. And so there's this chap, Corey Keyes, down in Atlanta, and he's been advocating for a focus on mental health. And he says the current national strategy of focusing slowly on mental illness can, at best, reduce mental illness, but not promote mental health. And what he's saying is that this is it's a different access, that just simply not having serious mental illness, either depression or bipolar or schizophrenia, the absence of that isn't where our goal should be. And this describes both flourishing and languishing. And here he says, put simply, the absence of mental illness is not the presence of mental health. You can go to the next slide. Flourishing individuals function markedly better than all others, but barely 1/5 of the U.S. adult population is flourishing. And this is what I was seeing in my cardiology practice in the elderly, that people were, Garrison Keillor is retiring, and he talked about Lake Wobegon, where people said, life's not so bad. And you can pick this up from people when you ask them, how are you doing today? And they say, not so bad, or could be worse, and that we could say that really doesn't matter, isn't important, but it is. If I look out the window here, and I'm across from Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. It's a beautiful day. It's 65 degrees, nearly dead calm, sun's out, could not be better, and it's peaceful, and life is great for me. And if I say not so bad, I have a problem. So what is flourishing? Flourishing is the combination of hedonic well-being and positive functioning. And there is something called the hedonic treadmill. And what this says is that you're feeling a little down, so you go out and buy a new car. And you feel really good until the first payment comes due. And you go back to some level of happiness. But flourishing is much more than just happiness. And we'll get into that with Seligman's definitions. And then there's this positive functioning part, which is both psychological and social functioning. Languishing, on the other hand, is low hedonic well-being and low positive functioning. Next graphic, Donna.
I just want to comment before you go on to the next graphic, how I think I said it before too, but how important I think this approach is, because it's not seeing mental health and wellness as just polar opposites, that there's this distinction that people can have whatever medical situation they have, whether it be mental or physical, and still be flourishing or be languishing. And I think the distinction is so important, and one that physicians and many of us just as lay people don't always make that distinction. So I just wanted to comment on that, but go ahead.
Yeah. And people who are not depressed but are not flourishing, the maneuvers are easy, and we'll get into them. So hedonic well-being basically is either you have this positive affect, you're cheerful, interested in life, happy. People would say, oh, this is a happy person. Or you say, I'm satisfied with my life. And there are people who are quite satisfied with their lives, but they're not like bouncing baby boys. They're quiet and everything else, but they say they're satisfied. And then there's the social functioning, positive psychological functioning, which includes self-acceptance, so you're holding attitudes about yourself, personal growth, seeking challenges, purpose in life, the individual finds his own life as having a direction and meaning, environmental mastery, that is the ability to select, manage, and mold personal environment to suit one's needs, autonomy, that is you're guided by your own socially accepted standards, and then positive relations with others, which is pretty much self-defined. Then there's positive social, which is social acceptance. Basically, you accept other. Social actualization, you believe people, groups, and society have the potential and can evolve or grow positively. Social contribution, you see your own daily activities as contributing to society. Social coherence, interest in society and social life, and finds there's meaningful in society is intelligible. And then social integration, a sense of belonging to and comfort with and support from the community. Next graphic. And so what Corey Keyes has done is said you need to have hedonic well-being plus a certain number of psychological functions and positive social functions. And what he did was analyze the midlife in the United States study. Baseline was in 1995. It was a 10-year follow-up. And 6.3% of the study subjects died. And in a fully adjusted model, risk of death for non-flourishing versus flourishing was about 60% higher. And this was significant. And this mortality impact is about the same as for major depression, but the prevalence is 4 times as great. And so what we would conclude from this is that really the mortality burden of people languishing is 4 times as great as the mortality burden of people who actually have major depression. Next graphic. And so this is a huge public health problem. Not only are people feeling bad, but they're dying from it.
That's true. And I just want to again add, and because one of the dynamics that often happens with older people is that lack of connection and isolation and loneliness.
Yes.
And I know that becomes toxic to health and well-being also.
And it's making friends becomes harder and harder, but becomes more and more important as our friends either leave the area or exit life. And so it takes some energy. It takes some energy, but it pays off. So Martin Seligman, I think few, if anybody, would dispute that he is the founder of the concept of positive psychology. And he had been studying dogs and their response to shocks, and he didn't want to get labeled as a dog shocker. And so he noticed that this problem that just absence of mental illness wasn't mental health. And he was really quite brave because people said, there's all these people suffering from depression and everything else. Why are you focusing on how people can be happy? And it's this whole thing about how can you be happy when somebody else in the world is suffering? And I'm going to go into this at the end of asking, does it help? Does it help for me to be suffering? Yes, I recognize that there are wars going on around the world and all those kind of things, but I can actually do more for people at home by being cheerful than by wearing my heart on my sleeve and being in a bad, suffering mood. And I can actually do more for humanity by being positive than some connectedness to somebody halfway around the world I've never seen and have no intention of or no ability to do anything about it. So Seligman, back to Seligman, said there's 5 things that people seek as endpoints. First is emotion, so that's happiness. They want to feel happy. And people seek these 5 things to varying levels. Second is engagement, and these are kind of things where you suddenly, where did the time go? I was playing chess, or I was knitting, or I was doing crossword puzzles, and suddenly I realized, oh my gosh, it's been 3 hours. Third is relationships that are positive. We, as human beings, we generally seek out and we do better when we have relationships with other people. Fourth is meaning and purpose. I think soldiers in combat frequently find that they're in combat and it becomes clear that there's meaning and purpose in life. And fifth is accomplishment. And Seligman got this from him. He's a bridge player. And he has a bunch of bridge playing buddies who they love to win. They're not happy. It doesn't make them happy. They just feel a sense of accomplishment winning playing bridge. And they think of like triathletes or marathon runners or just the no pain, no gain group of people. And you can see where accomplishment comes in. Next graphic. And I really would encourage you to read Seligman's work. There's a lot of science behind this. It's quite robust.
I second that. I think that the book Flourishing, he really takes it away just from the hedonic kind of happiness, but well-being is such a grounded concept with
much more robust, just happiness. And he also has a book, Optimistic Child, which is for grandparents. It's worth reading. So Seligman says there's 24 character strengths. I'm not going to read through them, but let's have the next graphic. And you can see the website down there, viacharacter.org, and you can go through and check your character strengths. And a paper in Scientific American came out in Scientific American about a year ago. That was an observational study of about 500 people.
And I really want to comment. I just want to make one comment on, since the link is there, I really encourage people. I know I have my clients. I actually have done it myself. I have my husband. My son has done it. If you go to the AuthenticHappiness.org, it will take you to, I think it's the University of Pennsylvania or Penn State, where he has his master's in positive psychology. They're free assessments about depression, about the character strengths. It's really quite interesting. You just have to sign in with your username and create a password. And if you scroll down to the VIA or Values in Action character strengths, you can ask for all 24, and it will just confirm what you know. And other times what I have discovered is sometimes it's this aha experience for people to say, I hadn't really thought as part of me, or now I understand why I'm not liking my job so much, because I'm not able to use that strength and can begin to think about how to use it, the strength, in a different way. So I really encourage everybody to take advantage of the fact that it's free and out there and see what you learn about yourself.
Yeah. So let's go to the next graphic, and while we're waiting for it to change, this was a paper came out of almost exactly a year ago where the PERMA scores were assessed, and then they assessed character strengths too. And what they found was that the PERMA scores are pretty highly correlated. The one that, or the two that are least correlated there on the second row and second column are engagement and relationships. And you can, that makes sense to me, that if you're engaged in building model ships, chances are that's a pretty solitary activity. Next graphic. Engagement and positive emotion also are a little lower, but what Kaufman and his colleagues did was conclude that these were all basically similar constructs, and they just used a single construct for positive well-being. And they found that the character strength correlated with well-being. The weakest were prudence, judgment, and self-regulation, and the strongest were hope, gratitude, and love. And the next graphic. And so what they did, they took these 24 and jammed them all into a single regression equation with well-being as the dependent variable, and came up with two that remained significant. And this was love of learning, or these were love of learning and gratitude. And what I understand, sort of the way I understand love of learning, is the opposite of love of learning is fear of the unknown, fear of the novel. And so you wake up in the morning and you say, hey, I'm awake. Something good is I'm going to learn something today. That's great. Versus you wakes up and think, oh my God, I don't know what's going to happen. That's obviously not a state of well-being. And then the other is thankfulness. And the opposite of that, if you may remember Jimmy Baker when he was an evangelist before he went to prison, and he said, well, you want a Winnebago, pray for a Winnebago. You want a brown Winnebago, pray for a brown Winnebago. That's not really gratitude. Let me have the next graphic. And so it's these two attributes. Love of learning is a little harder to adopt. Gratitude is a very easy behavior to adopt. But practicing each one of these, and you can think of, I was thinking of Omar, the shooter down in Orlando, how he just didn't meet any of Corey Key's attributes and those things. Now, so Seligman, way back, and this is a trial that's 10 years old, did an internet-based randomized controlled trial and had several interventions, placebo-controlled exercise. So early memory, think about your early memories. That's what people had to do. A gratitude visit to go visit somebody and thank them. 3 good things in life. Every evening for 1 week, you write down 3 good things that happened to you that day and why they did. You at your best, writing down what you would be like at your best. Identifying your signature strengths, which meant going online, like Dory mentioned. And then using your signature strengths in a new way. Graphic, please. And we can see that in the next graphic that early memories, no impact on depressive symptoms immediately post-test or even at any point. Gratitude created a positive impact for about a month. 3 good things, simply doing it for 1 week had an impact for 6 months, as did using signature in a new way. And so you at your best and find your strengths. It's immediately post-test, people reported fewer depressive symptoms. But really, this focusing on the good things, hey, there's still some water in the bottom of the glass here, and using strength. I'm particularly reminded of, I was driving home one night and was listening to a woman who grew up in Beirut during the Civil War. And she had to decide whether she was going to risk dying on the way to school because she had to cross the green line, and there were snipers. And so going to school is a death-defying act. And so I talk to people. I'm happy I can leave for work expecting that I will get to work. That's one good thing. And you're like, gee, that's strange. There are a lot of people around the world who can't do that. So gratitude, people reported more happiness for a month. 3 good things, 6 months, using strengths in a new way to help people for 6 months too. And so these both reflecting on the good things that happen to you and why, that's great things. And then also helping people, using your strengths to help people improves happiness and decreases reports of depression. So it's easy to improve your own well-being. Thanking people help you, even for the smallest task. Kind to people whenever you have the opportunity. And at the end of the day, really take notes, good things that happened to you and why they did. And I think my undergraduate degree was in cultural anthropology, and I would, not that I'm an anthropologist, but I would say that to this, every culture that I know of has prayers of thanksgiving. It's just, they're there. Next graphic. Now, what we do know, too, is that when you practice these 3 behaviors, you're also improving the well-being of others. Okay? And there was a paper in the British Medical Journal from the Framingham Heart Study Social Network, and this was nearly 5,000 individuals followed from 1983 to 2003, and happiness was measured with a validated 4-item scale. You can go to the next graphic. Oh, my computer just turned off. There we go.
And again, those of you who don't have the slides, don't worry, you will be able to see them in the recording.
What Fowler and Kottke reported is that they were able to see happiness spreading through social networks, and also these are the green dots, smiles, and frowns in the dark blue dots. And so and you can go to the next graphic. There's some construct that basically, when you're kind to people, it travels around through, and what they found was it travels as far as 3 degrees of separation, and then it comes around back to you. And so the best way to create kindness and a positive social network is to be positive. Now, this is a randomized trial by O'Connell, and this came out about a year ago in the journal Positive Psychology. And I would suggest that you get on the e-table of contents distribution list for the journal Positive Psychology. They have some very interesting things coming out. A lot of them are in college students, but every once in a while there's something very interesting. So they assigned people to several different conditions. There's a relationship-focused gratitude activity, and they had to write and deliver a positive message to someone in their social network. And I was in a conference, and I had to do this a couple weeks ago, and I sent it to a friend of mine, and she called me up and said, "Oh, thank you very much. I was really having a bummer day, and I got this letter from you, and it was just wonderful." And it was easy to do. Those assigned to the relationship-focused kindness activity were instructed to do something kind for someone in their social network. Those in the self-focused group were instructed to do these activities to themselves. Those in the control condition were asked to list 3 things that occurred over the day and reflect on how they felt. Notice it wasn't 3 good things, but just 3 things that happened. And all participants were instructed to do this every second day for 7 days. Next graphic, please. And what we found was that overall relationship satisfaction fell for the control group, increased somewhat for the self-focused group, but increased much more for the relationship-focused group. And so working on relationships does provide benefit. It strengthens relationships. And this is, one could almost say this is a profound grasp of the obvious, Tom. But sometimes the obvious isn't so obvious, and sometimes what we believe is right is in fact not. Next graphic. So the question is, does all of this make us, do we have to trade off our aspirations in order to feel good? And I would say absolutely not, particularly those of us who are in any sort of social environment, but particularly corporate environments. And I work for a corporation that has 23,000 employees and 1,700 physicians. And so it's a moderate-sized health care organization. And what I tell people is you really want people to want to see you when you need something from them. And so if you're walking down the hall and you keep seeing doors closing or people disappearing around the corner or phones not getting answered, you have problems. And so unless you're a bank robber or a street thug, healthy thinking is more likely to get you your dreams than being morose, mean, and dispirited, because people will want to see you, they'll want to help you. Certainly for young people who are looking at job promotions, if it looks like you're only marginally able to take care of yourself at the current level, nobody's going to promote you. Next graphic. So cheerfulness, and I think, at least my own experience, I grew up in a sort of this Teutonic household, and where you're gruff and focused and that kind of stuff. Over time, I've come to realize that smiling at people and being friendly to them and helpful and all those things, actually, it changes the brain. And with functional MRI, we do know that brains change and that we can change our brains. There's plasticity, and that's real stuff, and it's not just hand-waving by some folks who have, it's real physiology. So the question is, it goes back to this problem that Seligman faced, that they said, there's so much suffering in the world. How can you justify focusing on taking people from just not being depressed to actually feeling great about themselves and feeling great about life? And first of all, 80% of us would benefit from improved mental health, even though we are not mentally ill. And ignoring the needs of individuals who could benefit from better mental health does not help the mentally ill. If we want to help the mentally ill, we help the mentally ill. Simple maneuvers can increase mental health. Happiness in individuals creates happiness in groups. Next graphic. And like I said at the beginning, that, yes, I acknowledge there's huge problems in Europe. There's huge problems in Africa. There's huge problems around the world, but in my job, I can't do anything about those. But what I can do, up and down the hall, the people I meet with, I can change their life experience to the positive, and I can change it through very simple maneuvers. And we do need to train our brains like we train our bodies, and our brains are trainable. To when somebody asks, how's it going? Wonderful. How's your day? Great. Smiling at them, offering to help. And the only cost, I would say, of cheerfulness is the loss of one's own grumpiness, and you really lose the ability for a Schadenfreude. That is the bad joy of other people's, that comes from other people's misery. Next graphic. We have colleagues of mine and I, at the request of Dr. George Isham, who's a National Academy of Medicine, have written a paper we titled Well-Being in All Policies, Promoting Cross-Sectoral Collaboration to Improve People's Lives. And what we've argued is that by focusing on well-being in public policy, we're going to do much better than just focusing on health, because well-being is the goal that people really strive for. And Dorian mentioned in the beginning that people can be very ill, or they can be dying, like my father died a couple of years ago. He was 97. But he had clear instructions: don't go to the hospital, don't stick me full of tubes, and he died the way he wanted to, and he died with well-being. It's impossible to say he died with health, because he had a whole bunch of things wrong with him, but he died with well-being. And we know people can live for long periods of time with things like quadriplegia or broken necks and that have very high levels of well-being. And some people even say that their well-being improved markedly after they had an accident because they came to value things in life. So to wrap things up, and Anne Meal will recognize this, the geography here. I would say that the keys are, one, staying active. And when I was a fellow, Per Olaf Ostrom, the grand old man of exercise physiology in Scandinavia, told me, he said, Tom, you can always distinguish between juveniles and adults in mammalian species because the juveniles are always looking for something to do and adults are always looking for some place to sit down. And it's adaptive because juveniles need to develop strength and coordination, which they can only do through physical activity, and adults need to conserve calories. So we have this deep brain that says sit down and don't move unless you're going after food. And we need to fight that through. We need to fight that through programming, through scheduling, and creating opportunities and bans for physical activities in our lives. Secondly, eat your veggies. The most recent stuff I've seen out of Spain is probably somewhere between 9 and 11 servings of fruits and veggies a day. So I would say as close to vegetarian diet as you tolerate. If you need animal protein, think of fish. Use olive oil as your oil. You don't need a low-fat diet, but what it is low animal fat, high vegetable fat diet. Drink a little wine. Don't smoke. Get the electronics out of your bedroom. Give thanks. Be kind. Be well. And thanks so much for the last 45 minutes letting me.
Now we're going to have more interaction and talking. So I do want to encourage people to submit any questions or comments. This was really packed full, Tom, of just very helpful, user-friendly, I think, in some ways, the evidence-based, but also the integrating of positive psychology, of the kind of good things, the blessings, the gratitude, and it's really the resilience, too, that sort of trading yourself and learning how to look to the positives. And it's not being Pollyanna, it's just being able to recognize the half full rather than the half empty. I think it's so important. There have been a couple of questions, and people have asked me not to use their name with these questions, but around the brain. And so this one specific question was, does having a diagnosis of MCI mean you will definitely move on into Alzheimer's? And then other concerns about, you were just mentioning about exercising the body and brain, and with people second half of life, suggestions at all of how people can sort of help themselves in terms of, I don't know if one can totally prevent, but push off different forms of dementia. But the specific question here is, does having a diagnosis of MCI mean you will definitely move on to Alzheimer's?
Yeah, and I'm not going to answer that one because I'm or a neurophysiologist. And I think probably the answer is no, because if you focus on definitely, nothing's definite, so I can say no.
Right.
What comes out with the brain in the second question is it's use it or lose it. And I write papers to make sure, check whether I'm getting demented or not. I've never been able to remember anybody's name, and so I take refuge there. But my wife knits. She does this very complex knitting, which I can't understand at all. Some people do crossword puzzles every day. My wife does Sudoku. But some people do math problems. But really keeping your brain, let's say, oiled, keeping the synapses open. And then also drugs and alcohol. If our Brett Hockey, who's head of our neurosciences unit, says that the opiate use in the United States is going to result in the largest iatrogenic epidemic in the world, in the history of the world, and it's going to be checked. That opiates create irreversible changes in the brain, and we're probably facing a national tragedy here. And so I would encourage people to avoid the opiates. And it was a mess, and it got started because somebody said we can manage people on long-term on opiates, and we can't. It just doesn't work. And so we've got a problem there. But really using your brain, staying social, doing challenging things, mentally challenging things, clearly keeps the brain better working better than letting it go to sleep.
What about just trying to integrate these other questions right now? And then I know I still have a bunch of other ones too, but what's your opinion of mindfulness meditation with regard to maintaining a positive attitude?
Yeah, I would say yes, and it took me, and I'm not sure I still understand what mindfulness means, but I would say yes. The Dalai Lama said something to the extent of we're so remorseful about the past and we so fear the future that we're afraid to live in the present. And I think, yeah, as we get older, there's a tendency for us to be remorseful about past sins and to fear the future. And I think practicing mindfulness to squeeze those things out of our mental field of vision and really, using, it's basically, I would say, self-cognitive behavioral therapy to say, like, the things that I did in the past, okay, they're done. Who knows about the future? Today, focus on what I can do today and what's positive about today and how I can use today to make tomorrow as good as possible. And so I think, mindfulness is an excellent practice.
Another question from Michelle in Boston, and a number of people, I should say, have said really great presentation and are thanking you. So she has a question about relationships, so particularly single women, parents, siblings, deceased, friends move away, become ill and pass away. Building friendships becomes difficult. Any research on building new networks as one ages?
The research is that it's important. And I guess it depends on what age. I think it's very interesting that the research suggests that multi-generational communities are very important, but then old little children running around and screaming. But I think, frankly, my wife and I have, through my training, we've lived in Minneapolis and in Montreal and in Chapel Hill and back in Minneapolis and in Rochester. And as we've moved around, it's become almost more and more. You start out in high school and you think your high school buddies are going to be your friends for life, and then you go to college, and it does become harder and harder. And I think one of the maneuvers as one ages is considering a move into a more congregate space. I know a lot of elderly want to remain in their own homes forever, but the big old house where you raised your family may not suit you anymore, and actually there's two problems. It isolates you as an individual, and it creates just one heck of a lot of anxiety in your kids, because as you get older, they wonder if you don't answer the phone on the fourth ring, is something wrong? They're worried that you may break your hip and be lying on the floor for 2 days, or all those kind of things. And so I think taking a realistic look at age-appropriate living conditions, and you can have, there's a lot of communities where you can have your own condo, your own privacy as you wish, and really live pretty much independently, but also not living isolated. And this is what my parents did. They moved at a particular age, and they happened to be old. They moved in with all their old friends, and I had a great time, and it became much easier for them to get out and be social and have dinner with their friends. And so thinking that through in planning, and as a physician, I've seen this be a terrible burden on kids that they're worried about their parents who insist on living alone far longer than they should with just marginal capabilities.
It's so difficult because we all want to be as autonomous as we can be, and it does become difficult when different limitations develop, and needing to be realistic, optimistic and realistic. I always like that term. I always coin a Bill Sadler, who's actually going to be my guest next month, had this term optimistic realism, and I think it's part of what we need as we age.
And again, looking at it and saying, gee, this will make it so much easier for me to visit with the friends I want to visit with. And rather than, gee, it's terrible getting old, you could say it's even more terrible not getting old, because that's the only alternative.
That's true. So I have another question from Michelle, who says she has a question about brain training, and it's one of these interesting paradoxes. She said, you've mentioned the importance of training the body and staying active and how movement benefits the brain. So her question is regarding brain exercises like posit science. Is there a benefit of sitting in front of a computer doing brain exercises?
I guess if it's really challenging your brain, yeah, I can't answer. Right. I don't know of any specific trials. What we do know that, and this particularly for kids, is that sitting in front of a TV is very. Mom sitting in front of her smartphone while the kid is there is even more negative, because they're not interacting with their child. But I don't see that there's any difference between doing exercises on a computer versus challenging exercises on a paper and pencil. One does have to then take a time out to get your 10,000 steps or whatever else, your hour of physical activity a day.
There's been some interesting work. Some people who are part of this call have heard Lynn Barrett and Josh Barrett, and I know they're both presenting at the National Center for Creative Aging, which is having a conference in September in Washington, D.C., and both of them, but Lynn in particular, has been doing a lot of work with Second Life and helping set up kind of virtual communities for people who aren't able to get out of their house. And she sets up seminars about aging and brain work. I mean, it's wonderful, because there are a lot of people where the virtual community becomes an important part of their life and their community. So I guess it's the balancing act of, if you're able to be out and connect, it's important to do that. But there's some benefits of stimulating yourself in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, and I think, what for those of us matured before the smartphone and all those, we think that our grandkids and kids are socially isolated, but I think there are, in fact, that may not be true. There are some problems with thinking that everybody has to be happy all the time, because that's what all your friends on Facebook pretend they're doing. But a lot of my contacts are virtual. I have strong contact in the United Kingdom and in Finland and around the country. And yeah, I don't think they have to be face to face. Now, I'm a lay person in all this. I'm just a cardiologist with an interest in well-being. But I get joy out of getting emails from people and trading ideas and advice and all those kind of things. And I think those are real social contacts.
Absolutely. And my two virtual communities here, my Fourth Tuesday, my Boomers and Beyond Special Interest Group. I mean, it's wonderful to be part of real communities, but also virtual communities, because you can connect with people who don't live right in your geographical neighborhood.
Absolutely.
So Kathy from California, who, again, there have been many comments about just how much people have enjoyed their presentation, and some people have had to run off. And Kathy wanted me to mention, and I actually had pulled it up on my computer before I got her email, but so she's underscoring it. There is a program where the registration is actually taking place now for the fall. I had signed up for it and haven't just had enough time to do it, so I'm going to do it again in the fall. But there are two great resources that she's sharing, and the one I definitely know, and the other one I'm going to check out, that she said, I wanted to share two great resources to help clients, patients, yourself build their well-being through science-based practices. The Greater Good Institute at the University of California has a course called The Science of Happiness. And so if you Google the Science of Happiness, it's free, it's online. He had told me about it, and it sounds wonderful. And as I said, I've just been so busy this spring that I haven't been able to do it, but it will start again in September. And once you sign up for it, you have access to the resources forever. So I guess the email is http://gggia.u/#Happify. Happify. I think if you just Google Science of Happiness, you'll get to the course. And another website she mentioned is happifyhealth.com. happifyhealth.com. So I just wanted to mention those two courses that she mentioned. And I just want to remind people again, too, that Tom will be coming and joining the virtual call, but an interactive call next Tuesday, July 5th. So any of you who would like to be part of it, please, if you're not already part of the network, let me know and I'll give you the call-in information. This has been wonderful. I do know that you tend to use the term positive health rather than quality of life, and I just wondered if you could distinguish between them and why you prefer the positive health rather than quality of life.
Because the quality of life, there's a whole field of measuring quality of life, and most of those questions focus around like the PHQ-9 of how bad is your life. And so to try to escape from that vortex, we use the health positive functions because we really are looking for the positive, get people to think about positive rather than just how bad is your life, how far underwater are you emotionally.
Right. Yeah. Great. Are there any other sort of takeaways or suggestions that you can give the listeners about other ways to increase their well-being? You've mentioned some wonderful ones. I just wondered if there are others.
Those three, we do. One thing I did want to mention is there are some basic needs. We need to feel safe. We need security. So trying to tell people if they have food insecurity, saying just look at the good things in life. No, you can't do that. We do have some actual physical needs for well-being, but it really does boil down to appreciating what we have, being kind to people, and thanking them for when they help us. And it's effective and it's simple, and which is truly remarkable that things can be both simple and effective.
Right. It's interesting to think about how there's been probably more movement away from it, but how important it is to come back toward it because there's been so much more fear of strangers. Just thinking about the messages with children that they can't be outside playing anymore, or at least many families just get very worried. And so that for many years people avoid eye contact. And I know I've always been a eye contact person, and there's all these stories about Boston drivers, but if I make eye contact with somebody and smile, generally I'm able to get where I want to get, and it does get you far. But I think it's so easy for people to get scared and not remember how important it is to smile and make eye contact and pay it forward and help people. It's such an important part of kind of the good things about being part of this world.
Yeah, and there are some times that you don't want to give certain social signals. I mean, we can all imagine that kind of stuff. But we're pretty good judges of that.
Yeah.
But generally, yes, being kind and helpful. It doesn't mean being Mother Teresa, but it's a default where you feel safe, feel comfortable, and particularly around friends or people, because they will come back and help you.
No, absolutely. This has been wonderful. Any other last comments or that you'd like to leave everybody with? I think I've integrated all of the comments and questions. I mean, there have been many here saying, thank you so much for this thought-provoking and inspiring share. Superb presentation. Thank you. Have to leave early. Really enjoyed the presentation. So I just want to share some of those comments, too. So thanks again, Tom, and it's just been a pleasure.
Great.
Take care, everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.